Good afternoon, welcome to EduSat Network. Friend, as you know, we are having discussion on ancient Indian history. In today's lecture, we will try to understand the Mauryan Empire, its nature, and also Ashoka policy of Dhamma. What was its significance and with what circumstances it was formed and what objective it achieved. There are several facets of it. We will try to understand all of them. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio Dr. Shankar Kumar. He teaches history in Department of History at Hindu College, Delhi University, and keen interest of ancient Indian history. So I think his knowledge and experience will help us to understand this topic and will certainly give an insight to understand. As I told you that we'll try to nature, also the sources. What are the sources to study these periods and their importance, and how can we adjudge which sources are important and how we construct the history out of them. So on your behalf, I welcome Dr. Shankar Kumar for EduSat lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Amarendra ji, and good afternoon to my viewers. As you do well to recall that yesterday we discussed the period from 6th century BC up to the emergence of the Mauryas, spanning around 200 to 300 years. And today we shall be talking in continuum, in a sense, because we would be talking for the period immediately after this time slot. The chronology of the Mauryan period extends from 324 BCE to 187 BCE, and we should keep in mind that this is the first instance of a kind of subcontinental empire which Indian history saw. Now, keeping that in mind, there are so many facets which open up with reference to the Mauryan history, which we indicated in yesterday's discussion also. This is not only restricted to political and economic terms, but also on account of the nature of sources which allow us to reconstruct the history of the Mauryan period with great degree of precision and clarity. Several claims as evidenced in one set of sources get ratified or get modified or get substantiated or is rejected on account of other sources speaking about the same period. This is something which other periods, preceding periods, don't have the luxury of, and that's why the understanding of the Mauryan period is somewhat sharper as compared to the histories of previous periods. Now, what we shall do in today's discussion is first to understand the implications of an empire in the form of the Mauryas that you can see in your slide. There are some important points which we should take note of, because we are talking not only of a territorial state which had already emerged around the 6th century BC in North India and continued to consolidate all through the centuries up to the Mauryan period, but by the time we reach to the Mauryan period, it had reached its climax. This process, this historical process of states emerging as territorial states with its revenues deep entrenched in several activities alongside agriculture, that is trade, commercial activities, artisanal activities, and several other professional activities and so forth. So, the state had more avenues of generating resources, generating taxes, and as a result, it could elaborate its administrative structure in a better way. So, this has to be kept in mind. Now, when we say empire, there are quite a few things which automatically strike our mind. I have just tried to list those things because that is important for us to understand if we are talking about Mauryan history. First thing that comes to our mind when we talk of an empire as opposed to a mere state or territorial state is the vastness of the territory under the command of this empire. So, the territory which we are talking of as Mauryan territory virtually encompassed the entire Indian subcontinent. Of course, it did leave out the peninsular part of India, the southern peninsular part of India, the Tamil, Chol, Cher, Satyaputra, Pandya area, which is referred to in one of the Ashokan inscriptions as the neighboring states. So, that was out of the Mauryan command, but in the northwestern part of the subcontinent, the extent reached beyond Afghanistan, and that's how the entire subcontinent was virtually under the control of the Mauryas. But alongside this, we also must understand that it is not only the vastness of the terrain under the political control or political command which earns this epithet of empire, because there are other connotations of this. There are other attributes of an empire. One is, as you can see on your slide, the second point, heterogeneity in terms of social, political, and economic spheres. What do we mean by this? This is, if we take into account the entire stretch of the subcontinental geography that was under Mauryan control, we must understand that the entire terrain was not only geographically heterogeneous, but it was also socially, politically, and economically heterogeneous. Why do we say so is because there were several communities inhabiting different parts of the subcontinent who had still not taken to intensive cultivation as their dominant mode of subsistence. There were several pastoral communities, there were several forest dwelling communities, there were vast open tracts, uninhabited lands, which were also part of the Mauryan empire. So, when we talk of, when we visualize Mauryan empire, we should not be fixated by the sheer typology of the people who were inhabiting the northern Gangetic plain, the middle Gangetic plain, and so forth. So, once we take that into account, the process of state formation and social stratification and so forth that we discussed yesterday, that also is brought in the ambit of today's discussion, and we should keep in mind, that's why I'm talking about it prior to detailed discussion on this, that we should keep in mind that those processes, those trajectories of social and economic changes continued even during the Mauryan period, and in a way the entire stretch coming under one political control had some implication on these processes in terms of aiding it, in terms of accelerating the pace of change and so forth, and also simultaneously depriving some areas or some sections on account of its political presence and so forth. So, we shall try to understand it in that perspective. When we say economic heterogeneity or heterogeneity in terms of economic spheres, what we mean is diversity of economic pursuits. as we just said, that not all the people, not all the communities had taken to intensive cultivation or agriculture. There were animal breeders, there were pastoral societies, there were people still in the tribal mode of existence, which also tells us that the heterogeneity could be seen also in terms of political organizations. Because if we think of the northwestern part of India, even in the post-Mauryan period, quite a few tribal republics, tribal chieftainships did survive even after the decline of the Mauryan period. Same is the case, same could be the case with the greater part of Deccan and South India, because before the Mauryan period, we don't have any direct reference to very well-knit political organizations organized in terms of territorial states in these areas. So it was through the experience of these areas during the Mauryan rule that probably some political ideas related to territorial states, etc., could have been transmitted, could have been carried across to these people. So that possibility also has to be kept in mind. So when we say heterogeneity, it has to be understood in all these contexts, in all these spheres. Now, given the heterogeneous nature of the area under the command of the Mauryas that we eventually will get to know, that had its own compulsions in terms of the state policies. It necessitated, and as you can see as the next point on your slide, necessity of new political strategies. The context of understanding this particular point is that a state or an empire of this magnitude, governing people with such diverse backgrounds in terms of polity, economy, society, and so forth, and cultural practices, the state had to come out with new ways and means, not only to administer them, but also to justify its rule. Let's please try and understand that legitimacy to rule in the pre-modern times, particularly in the ancient times, is a separate and fascinating area of research in history. And in the absence of the present day constitution and so forth, through which the states earned their legitimacy to rule, in ancient times it had to be earned, it had to be won, the legitimacy had to be established by latching on to the existing traditions. For instance, in the Brahmanical scheme of things, it could be the royal genealogy, it could be the Kshatriya status of the kings, and the promise to protect the territory from neighboring attacks and so forth. Now, this was the conventional sources through which any state could have derived the legitimacy to rule. But as we said, that Mauryan rule is the first instance of empire-like presence in Indian history. Therefore, it necessitated new tools of seeking legitimacy as well. And the attempt by Ashoka, the third amongst the rulers, the third amongst the Mauryan rulers, to propagate the policy of Dhamma, which overtly appears to be a moral code of conduct or something to deal with social norms and so forth, actually has been sought to be understood with reference to this legitimacy issue. because here for the first time in Indian history we encounter a king seeking to establish direct contact with the people and thereby win the legitimacy to rule. We shall talk about in detail as and when we come to this particular issue. Now, since we are talking of the implication of the empire, I have just hinted it towards the beginning. And the next point, as you can see again on your slide, is the nuclear core and peripheral areas under the empire. This is a part of an attempt by historians, present day historians, to understand the nature of the empire, and we shall come back to this when we talk of the nature of the empire, because that constitutes a separate head of our discussion. So I shall not be elaborating on this at this point of time. Now, as you can see in your slide, having since we have already discussed the points that we are going to cover in today's discussion, let's begin with the sources for reconstructing Mauryan history. And as we said towards the beginning, that with the advent of the Mauryans, we are confronted with a situation, in fact, we encounter a situation where there is a relative profusion of sources. So, we have a range of sources through which we can reconstruct the Mauryan history. Amongst the literary sources, we can list the Arthashastra, the Puranas, the Buddhist and Jain sources, and there were several other Brahmanical sources, the conventional ones as well as other literary pieces, for example, Dharma Sutras and so forth. And of course, the foreigner's account, you can say, because we have Megasthenes' Indica, which also informs about the Mauryan rule, particularly its administration and other details, in a perspective which is different from the usual Brahmanical perspective, Brahmanical take on the Mauryan state of things. There are problems associated with these sources that we shall soon be discussing. But let's first just talk about the range of sources that we have for Mauryan period. Next, we have the Ashokan inscriptions. This is important because inscriptions for the first time make their entry in Indian history in the Ashokan period, hence in the Mauryan period. So, before that we do not have a very credible instance of inscriptional sources, although claims have been made in the recent times of some scribbles on potsherds which remind us of the literary traditions which probably could have survived even before Ashoka, but by and large they also fall within the Mauryan period. So, that is the inscriptional source which is extremely important, and it makes its entry in Indian history in this period. Coins we have already discussed in our previous discussion. This was a tradition which continued ever since 6th century BC, and this continued across the Mauryan period. Despite the Mauryans being the first empire, political empire in India, they probably did not issue their own separate coins, which subsequently went on to become the marker of one's sovereignty. Despite that, the same old punch marked coins continued. Of course, their number must have grown, and the variety also must have grown, because we are in the Mauryan context, we are talking of a very complex kind of interaction, trade and commercial interactions and exchange. Therefore, the coins facilitated these exchanges, and it has to be understood in that context. Nevertheless, as we said, that there is no distinct coins issued by the Mauryan mints. So, the same old punch marked coins continued and facilitated the penetration of commercial and economic activities that we get to see during the Mauryan period. So they constitute yet another important source of understanding the Mauryan periods. Next is the monumental sculptures and structures. Now they are monumental because they are made of stone, which is a non-perishable kind of a material which endures the time, or they are present. They can be seen even today. The best specimen could be not only sculptures but also the Ashokan pillars, which can be studied not only with reference to what is written on it, but also in terms of its craftsmanship. And whatever way they look today, in its original form, they must be looking more, you can say, monumental than the present times. The shine on the surface, the tapering shape of the Mauryan pillars. So there was some kind of regal sense associated with these inscriptions, the points at which these inscriptions, these pillars were erected, and so much so that if we talk of subsequent times, Firoz Shah Tughlaq was so wonderstruck by one of these Mauryan inscriptions, which he could not understand that it was written by Ashoka, the Mauryan king. But the sheer splendor associated with these edicts probably were such that he was awestruck by the sheer beauty of and sheer majesty of this, and he got it transported from Haryana to Delhi and got it erected at Firoz Shah Kotla. Those visiting Delhi can even see it today. So that is also an specimen of Mauryan craftsmanship. That is one. Despite, in spite of, alongside monumental sculptures, we also have several structures. One can visit Kumharar in present day Patna, which was the ancient Patliputra, the capital of the Mauryans, and Didarganj and adjoining areas, and get to see sculptures, the specimen of craftsmanship and so forth. The palace remains, although it is said that much of it was made of wood, therefore they would not survive the time that has elapsed, but some of the stone base of these pillars can still be seen at Kumharar, and there are quite a few other specimen in terms of structure that can be discerned from this place. So in terms of structures, then you have the Buddhist stupas, the Buddhist monuments which were patronized by Ashoka, and caves which were again quite a few donations were made. So they also survive to the present times and inform us about the socio-economic and also religious conditions during the Mauryan periods. Last but not the least is the NBPW cultures, which stands for Northern Black Polished Ware Cultures, that we have discussed in our earlier discussions. What is the implication of NBPW cultures? But why it is important here is because we are talking of a continental dimension, Indian subcontinental dimension in the case of the Mauryas, and the mere presence of NBPW potsherds or NBPW cultures in the areas beyond Vindhyas testify to the fact that Mauryan political presence was in these areas as well. It also is symptomatic of some kind of material prosperity, because this is not an ordinary painted grey ware kind of utensils or other potteries that we are talking of, NBPW is a distinct kind of pottery, and it is referred to as deluxe pottery. So there is some kind of economic well-being associated with these cultures. So that reflects a little bit on the economic prosperity of the times also. So they constitute the sources so far as reconstructing Mauryan history is concerned. Now let's try to understand some of these sources in a little bit of detail, so that we get to have a more robust idea of the way in which Mauryan history actually has been sought to be reconstructed. For example, this Arthashastra, which is supposed to be written by Chanakya or Kautilya or Vishnugupta. This is the way in which the authorship has been identified of this particular text. Now, the way it was discovered, this particular text was discovered because before 1906, people did not know about Arthashastra, but the manuscript was made available to R. Shamsastri, and he started publishing it in journals, and academicians started reflecting on it, they started working on it, translations were done, and subsequently in the 1960s, even critical editions came on the basis of looking at several manuscripts claiming their lineage from Arthashastra. And as the name suggests, this is a text which is not on religion, but this is a text about political economy. It is more mundane in approach, one can say, and it's a welcome addition to the kind of sources that informs us about ancient India in the earlier period, because mundane life and sources reflecting on the mundane aspects of life were very hard to come by so far as ancient India is concerned. So here we have a theoretical account of the political arrangements, the economic compulsions, revenue pressures, and other descriptions of the Mauryan period. Historians do debate about the rootedness of this particular text in the Mauryan times. Some argue that it was perhaps written in the subsequent times. Some argue that some portions of Arthashastra could have been interpolated or extrapolated, that is, additions could have been made subsequently, and the original kernel could be limited to some sections of Arthashastra. But that apart, we have around 15 sections or books, Adhikaranas in Arthashastra. The first 5 talk about the internal administration, which is referred to as the Tantra, and the next 8 talks about the interstate relations, as probably could have been prevalent during the period, and the last 2 is sort of miscellaneous information. I mean, so that's the way the text is organized. Nevertheless, historians say that instead of understanding this particular text as a descriptive text of the time, it would be more prudent to understand this text as a prescriptive text, meaning thereby that it represents the ideal, or it articulates the ideal of a state more than what actually could have been the scenario. So this kind of interpretation of Arthashastra as a source material has been done because of several traits or several features present in the treatise itself. For example, it avoids specifics For example, Patliputra is not spoken of in this particular text. Mauryan rulers and their names are not spoken of in these texts. Some argue that, well, it is a theoretical kind of a treatise, therefore names have deliberate or names could have deliberately been avoided. Nevertheless, given the tone and tenor of the treatise and given the broad chronology within which the treatise can be identified, there is some kind of definite pertinence to the Mauryan ways, to the Mauryan scheme of things, which perhaps is reflected in this particular text. Now, we may not take it on its face value word to word, but it does give an idea of the political arrangements, of the economic scenario around the time that we are talking of. For instance, it talks of the ideal of Vijigishu. And now this is not to be taken in real terms, but certainly the ideal for a king to conquer and rule the entire subcontinent was already present during the period. So, this notion of Chakravarti, which is talked of in other sources also, is reflected here. So, one may not come to this conclusion that a king was not a king till he ruled over the entire area, but this ideal certainly was present and could be influencing the kings and their policies and their conquests, their desire to conquer the adjoining areas and so forth, because it was repeatedly articulated in different texts, religious as well as some kind of political economy text like Arthashastra. Apart from that, the text also informs us about the elaborate administrative structure. It gives us the details, names the designation of the officials, and also the specific sector that the person had to look after, the revenue demand, and the other administrative details are mentioned. Even the salaries, which appears to be quite generous as per the Arthashastric details, they are also to be taken cognizance of when we understand the Mauryan administration or the Mauryan rule. So, in a sense, we can say that Arthashastra as a text appears to be heavily imbued with the idea of maximizing revenue for the state. It even advises the king to resort to some unconventional methods, even superstitious beliefs, in order to maximize revenue. Now, this pressure of maximizing revenue could have come either as a result of wars and conquests that the state had undertaken, or the elaborate bureaucratic machinery that needed to be paid for in terms of salaries and so forth, the maintenance and so forth. So, this is the way in which one needs to understand, and since we also have such references of these officials in Ashokan inscriptions, and particularly with reference to Patliputra, even Megasthenes' Indica also speaks about it. Therefore, some kind of cross-checking can be done so far as exactitude and precision of these information is, or truthfulness of these information is concerned. Now, Puranas, since they come from a period subsequent to the Mauryas, and in their own typical style, they do inform us about the kings, the genealogies, and the years of their rule, which are always not true, because some of the Puranas talk of 19 Ashokan kings, some talk of less than that, and so forth. So, in terms of numbers and in terms of magnitude, in terms of details, they can be doubted, but they do help us in at least corroborating other information and adding some bit of precision by cross reference and so forth. Buddhist and Jain sources had their own take, which we discussed in yesterday's talk, that their perspective was to present Ashoka as a Buddhist and add religious kind of backdrop to the governance that was done under him and the policies that he had undertaken, and to project him in a particular way which is more amenable to religious ethos of Buddhism and so forth. There are other Brahmanical sources which look at the changes during the Mauryan period from an angle which is not always friendly. For instance, urbanization and urban occupations and urban activities are not looked at very favorably from the Brahmanical perspective, because their ethos still were rooted in the Vedic period, where such changes were not encountered, and these changes actually happened around 6th century BC, and it took time for Brahmanical theorists to come to terms with these changes, and overall approach seems to be that of opposition and some kind of aversion to these changes. So it is this kind of aversion which created some kind of a space for the heterodox sects to mushroom and grow and prosper in the Mauryan period, and it continued in the subsequent period as well. Now, Ashokan inscriptions we will discuss with reference to Dhamma. So, I am crossing this here. Punch marked coins, we have already discussed that it has to be understood with reference to the issuing authority, which probably were guilds, separate guilds, merchant guilds, artisanal guilds, but the state is not issuing them, and so forth. So, this is about the sources, and let's now try and understand as to what do we make of this policy of Dhamma, which was initiated by Ashoka, because as you can see on your slide, there are two ways of looking at it. One is in terms of its content, the Dhamma content, as to what actually was meant by Dhamma, and the second is its justification with respect to the political pertinence of this kind of a policy. Now, in terms of content, the best way to understand Ashoka's Dhamma is to read the Ashokan inscriptions, because Ashokan inscriptions at times, at places, gives us very direct information about as to what Ashoka meant by this policy of Dhamma, what he expected of the people. He wanted the children in the family to respect their father, mother, the senior people, elderly people, the Brahmanas, even the Shramanas. So, its tenor can best be understood by reading the Ashokan inscriptions. Similarly, the kind of sympathetic treatment to the travelers, to the merchants who travel long distance, the arrangements that the state made in order to give them shelter along the trade routes, the arrangements for planting more number of trees so that it can give some kind of shelter from sun heat, sun rays and so forth. People can sit down, the animals can make use of it, the water or drinking water facilities which are talked of as part of these inscriptions, they can all be understood with reference to the policy of Dhamma. Now, this policy was is said to be initiated by Ashoka, and some historians argue that it was his religious leaning towards Buddhism which led to this kind of a pursuit. But one has to understand that it has to be analyzed with reference to the state policy, and the individual religious pursuit of Ashoka has very little to do with it, because in terms of its political pertinence, this was very apt if we look at this policy of Dham from the point of view of the search by the state, by the monarch, by the ruler for a distinct and different kind of source of legitimacy. Because here he is talking, because here he has to contend with a more diverse subject. Some people are at a very high stage of social and economic development. They are urban dwellers, they are merchants, some are agriculturalists, some have still not taken to agriculture, some are still hunter and gatherers, some are still forest dwellers, some are pursuing Brahmanism, some are pursuing Buddhism, some are pursuing Jainism, other heterodox pursuits and so forth. So it is a kind of diverse social, economic and religious situation in which the state had to justify itself, and therefore instead of resorting to the Brahmanical conventional source of legitimacy, here Ashoka is trying to communicate with the people directly through this policy of Dham, which appears to be entering into the behaviors of people, day-to-day life, entering into the family, father, mother, seemly behavior and so forth, to avoid wars. For example, after the Kaling war, Ashoka himself says that he will no more undertake Ran Vijay, that is battle as part of conquest, physical battle as part of conquest, and he says that he'll rather resort to Dhamma Vijay, that is winning people's heart, and that's how he will conquer people. So not by war, not by warfare, but by winning their heart. So here we have this kind of a renunciatory king articulating the policy of Dham directly to the people and trying to connect with them, and therefore establish a legitimacy on a purely different ground so far as the conventions are concerned. Now, having discussed the content and the justification with respect to the political pertinence of Ashoka's Dhamma policy, let's now move alongside and try to analyze another important component of the Mauryan period or the Mauryan rule, and that is the Mauryan state. Now, if we look at the Mauryan state, the usual picture that comes out from the elaborations in Arthashastra is that of a very acutely centralized and bureaucratized empire. So much so that Professor R.S. Sharma, in his categorization of ancient Indian economy, refers to this period as the period of pan-economic presence and state control of economy. Now, this state control of economy is a kind of an idea which actually emerges from the kind of description that we find for the Mauryan period in Arthashastra. Of late, historians have started to question this, and they have started to look at the practical possibility of such kind of arrangement, or the absence of it, or the relative absence of it, or the impossibility of it, given the vastness of the Ashokan empire or the Mauryan empire, and given the archaic nature of technological development, modes of communications and so forth, the extent to which we tend to presume the centralization being present in the Mauryan period, that tends to be tends to be diluted by the recent viewpoint, and therefore it is the you can say not so centralized kind of visualization which is sought to be understood so far as Mauryan rule is concerned. This element of centralization and bureaucratization is contested in the Mauryan case through the critical reading of Arthashastra, and also the fact that it appears, Arthashastra as a text appears to be prescriptive text rather than a descriptive text. So there is much to be understood with reference to political theory and economic theory, theory of the state and so forth, but to presume that this was the exact description of Mauryan rule is somewhat unwarranted. So this is how the decentralization or decentralized model of Mauryan state is sought to be projected so far as understanding the nature of the state is concerned. So these are the two broad frames in which historians have sought to understand the Mauryan rule. Now, before we come to the decline of the empire, Mauryan empire, let's also try to understand that the theories presented as theories of decline of Mauryan empire, that is one thing, but there is something called the ongoing social, economic and political trajectories of change, the historical process. Now, if we take that into account, something that we had talked about towards the beginning of today's discussion, that if we take into account the preceding period of the Mauryan period and also the succeeding period of the Mauryan period, then we will perhaps have a more realistic understanding of the role that the state, Mauryan state, could have played so far as transforming the social, economic and political spheres as an issue is concerned, because the intensification of agriculture, the increased penetration of trade and commercial activities, more and more urban centers emerging on the landscape of Indian subcontinent, its spread across the Vindhyas. These are some of the economic and political processes which characterize the period preceding the Mauryan period, and if we look at the period succeeding the Mauryan rule, then we find these processes getting intensified. So the Mauryan rule does not appear to be redirecting these trajectories. So it basically supplanted itself, it established itself on these changes and tried to survive to the extent possible, and therefore with reference to decline, now historians argue somewhat differently that it's amazing that it could such a vast empire could survive for such a long duration of time, that is 150 years or so. So one should not be taken with a sense of surprise as to why this could not last for more than 150 years, because with reference to the decline of this empire, there are several theories. For example, during the nationalist phase of struggle and with communal flares going up, there were theories of Brahmanical revenge or Brahmanical upheaval, because Pushyamitra Shung, who was a commander in the Mauryan army, is supposed to have initiated a military coup, and that's how the Mauryan empire declined, and the Shunga rule came into being, and then Kanvas, etc., small polities started characterizing the northern part of the Indian subcontinent in the period succeeding the Mauryan rule. So this was argued with reference to the Buddhist policies pursued by Ashoka and maybe the subsequent rulers, which were not taken in the right spirit by the Brahmanical leaders, and the Brahmins got extremely annoyed with it, and that's why they revolted under the leadership of Pushyamitra Shung, who was a Brahmin, and so forth. So these theories are debunked now. Similarly, the military aspect is also talked about, in the sense that Ashoka, having renounced physical wars or warfares, paid little attention to the military preparedness of the Mauryan army, and that also annoyed the armed forces that existed during the Mauryan period, with diminished money going into the maintenance and upgradation of Mauryan army, and Ashoka having become a renouncer, the Mauryan army became enfeebled over a period of time, and that's why it could not survive for more than 150 years of its existence and so forth. So these are the theories which are proposed, but if we take into account the processes that we just discussed, what we find is that the continuation of this empire for 150 years itself appears to be a big thing, because if we look at these historical processes of territorial state formations, social stratification, increased penetration of agrarian way of life, even in new areas where agriculture was not happening in an intensive way in the earlier times, then we find that over a period of time other areas, for example, the Maharashtra area, the central India area where Vakatakas emerged in the subsequent times, in the Maharashtra and Andhra area where Satvahans emerged. So these areas were also during the Mauryan period gaining enough, we can say, capacity. It was a capacity building period for these areas to intensify agriculture, to generate more and more surplus, leading to intensification of social stratification and emergence of the ruling stratum, which over a period of time could emerge as a kind of regional polities or state-like structure, and emerge as a state which is distinct from the empire-like presence of the Mauryas. So if we look at this particular process with a long-term perspective, the continuum of the processes which had started, which had begun around the middle of the first millennium BC, which was the axial period of ancient Indian history, transformative period of ancient Indian history, then the entire story and the narrative of the Mauryan decline becomes somewhat out of place, and we tend to analyze this with reference to these processes rather than immediate events or personal discomfort in terms of communities, in terms of religions and so forth, because they are constructs which emerged in a particular backdrop, the effect of which, the impact of which becomes quite obvious to any reader in the present times. So this is the story, one can say, of the Mauryan period with reference to the novelty, the grandeur, the magnificence, the vastness of the Mauryan rule for the period that we have been talking of. At the same time, we have sought to locate this particular phase of ancient Indian history in a wider canvas, in a bigger historical canvas, beginning from 6th century BC onwards, and which did not stop with the decline of the Mauryas, but it continued even in the subsequent times. So, in this way, perhaps we can seek to understand the Mauryan phase in a more comprehensive way so far as ancient Indian history is concerned.
So, the decline of the empire, what you were talking about, several factors.
Yes.
But when we look at the Ashoka and then subsequent ruler, we find what the policy followed Ashoka.
Yes.
And the other ruler followed. There are shift, kind of magnificent shift. So, was it knowingly done or the inefficiency of the ruler? How will you assess
See,
this?
that is something that we did refer to in the course of our discussion. Weak rulers succeeding Ashok, or Ashoka's disdain for physical warfare, because he was pursuing Dhamma policy and hence paying scant attention to the armed preparedness of his army. They are the kind of arguments which have been suggested with reference to the Mauryan decline. But what I have sought to the way I have sought to understand this is from the perspective of the kind of understanding that we should be having for a period which is located so distant in time. And in terms of historical processes, these arguments which are born of a particular time in historiography, where the religious identities were tools of contesting or tools of creating spaces for several political movements, the independence movement, the communalism, and so forth. So these elements probably have been amplified and sought to be understood in that context. Okay. But if we look at the processes, the deep-rooted, deep-entrenched historical processes which are more permanent, which are more probable, and which are more rooted, then our understanding of the decline gets somewhat revisited in a substantial way.
Okay. As far as the policy of Dhamma is concerned, there are some scholars who say that this was not a policy related to Dharma, a transformation of the mindset of the Ashoka, but it was a meaningful, we can say, well thought of a strategy to follow to get position among the rulers of that times. So, coming down to the line, how do you assess in the present terms of your present perspectives?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Good that you asked this, because we should remind ourselves that our national emblem actually is the Ashokan Sarnath pillar, the four-lion capital that we use as national emblem. Our national bird is peacock, which was very prominent. Even some say that the name Maurya is actually derived from this particular animal. So, lot of the sensibilities which were the guiding principles of the Ashokan Dhamma policy in order to you can say in order to bring diverse sections of people at different stages of social and historical development, the religious diversity, the kind of heterogeneity that we talked at length during the course of our discussion. Such a kind of policy of Dhamma, which is talking of family, which is talking of seemly behavior, which is talking of son and daughters respecting fathers and mothers, and the king looking at his subjects like their sons and daughters. So this paternalistic kind of view comes as a sharp contrast to the earlier rulers who had resorted to traditional modes of deriving legitimacy. So Dhamma as a policy allowed Ashok to reach out to the people in an unconventional way and derive legitimacy directly from them through his Ashokan edicts and royal tours and so forth. And given the democratic aspirations and given the multi-religious and ethnic kind of population that we have in India today, I think it's extremely appropriate that these symbols were appropriated by the modern Indian state.
Okay, well. So, well, friends, I hope this lecture have benefited you, given a base on which you can think over and try to understand the Mauryan Empire. Tomorrow we'll have another lecture on the Mauryan Empire. We'll talk about the different dimension, different perspective, and the different like society and economy things. So I hope you have certainly benefited from this lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on behalf I thank Dr. Shankar Kumar for giving such a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.